Salute is a program for and about men and women who have served our country. Our program includes news about the laws that affect veterans, information on benefits and services, and news from veterans organizations. And now, our host, Bob Peters.
Hello, and welcome to Salute. I'm your host, Bob Peters, and we are going now to back to part 2 of our show on September 11th. With me is Gary Kadow. Kadow.
Thank you.
Once again. And to refresh your memories, if you haven't seen the first part of the show, this is the book he wrote, 10 Days of Hell and Heroes. All about September 11th, and we're going to continue with the conversation. In fact, let's start out with one of those photos. Tell me who those individuals are.
Yeah, actually, this photo was taken on the first anniversary of 9/11. I was invited to come down and do a sunrise service for some of the first responders that were there. And these are some of the officers of the respective fire companies that had served there on September 11th that I got to know during the time I was there. And the other photo is where we actually held the service early in the morning at sunrise. This is what we call a fireman's cross. This was found in the rubble as we were digging through, and it was made into a memorial, and it's still there in New York. It's still on display. It's been moved since, but this is where we held our first service down there on the morning of September 11th, 2002, when the families were first allowed to go down and visit the site.
I should mention for people just tuning into this show that you originally went there as a Red Cross, a volunteer organizer.
Right, government
And then there was a huge need because they lost Father Mike, and you're Episcopal minister, and you stepped in to help out. So we've already discussed that in the first show, but for somebody who has not seen it, we need to tell people exactly what your jobs were. And the street doctor. Who is the street doctor?
Street doctor. Street doctor is a gentleman who had a buddy of his who happens to be a wonderful Rottweiler dog. It's what they call a cadaver dog. It's a search and rescue dog. The street doctor came out of Indiana. He's a firefighter in Indiana. All the time I was there, I never heard his real name. He was just called the street doctor. And his particular dog travels all over the world to work rescue sites like this. And on this particular day and situation of this event with 9/11, the dog actually went into debris areas and a pile and located the bodies of, well, at the time I left, they had found over 30, I believe almost 32 remains of those that had died in the collapse of the towers and the other buildings. So it was just, he's an amazing guy. This is what he does all the time. He goes all around the world doing this. And just a great person. And his dog, Sasha.
When you got there, one of the first things they had to do with your organizing was your different zones, right? Hot zone. You want to explain the different zones and staging areas?
Yeah, what they had to do, initially when we got there on September 11th, I got there probably around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, security was not that tight. There were literally people walking in and out of the area where the towers came down. There were young people walking in, people that lived in the neighborhood and so forth. But within a short time, they had set up security perimeters. The Army arrived very shortly after that. NYPD did what they could in the beginning, but the site's too immense. As I said, it was 16 football fields in size. So finally, when they set up security perimeters, they set up what they called a warm zone, a hot zone, and then ground zero. Which is where we were, in the center where the pit was, where the towers actually came down. And you required different security clearances, different levels of clearance in order to get into each one of these zones. The closest that you could get at the time was down around Canal Street, which was a considerable distance so that people wouldn't wander in. And in our particular case, as I said, we were right at the site of the towers where they came down in the pit. And that's where I spent most of my time, 10 hours a day down there. So.
Yeah, and there's a whistle that goes off. Tell us a little story about this whistle.
Yeah, you didn't want to hear that whistle. As we were down there, what was happening is because so many structures had been damaged with the towers coming down and the immense energy that generated, they weren't sure about the stability of the buildings in the area. And one of them at Liberty Plaza had been impacted pretty heavily by the towers coming down. So the windows and the top of it would literally start to pop out. It almost sounded like popcorn exploding, and glass would break and start to come down, and buildings would tremble. When that happened, they would sound a steam whistle. And what that meant very clearly to everybody involved, the first responders, is clear the area, get out of the area. The building could be coming down. So I would be there working, and as would the other people, and that whistle would go off, and you had to book out of there pretty quick. So I would be running down Trinity or Church Street trying to get out of the way.
But first you didn't know what it was.
Well, I didn't know what it was. I was standing there, and some of the firefighters came over, and they said, "You got to get the hell out of here." They said, "Don't you hear that whistle?" And I wasn't sure at the time what it was, and they explained that that meant clear the area. You're in immediate danger. Well, I'm not exactly a svelte guy. I don't run. I don't run that fast.
Well, you're in much better shape now. You've been working out, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I started running, and it kind of looked like a wounded elephant trying to get out of the way. And as I was running, 2 firefighters came up behind me, and they said, "Okay, Fodder, you got to go quicker than that." And they would grab me underneath the arms. They'd pick me up, and they would run me all the way down towards Battery Park, towards the end of the street, to get out of the way. But every time that whistle would go off, it was standard operating procedure. Go find Fodder Gary and get him out of the area, because he doesn't run that fast.
Yeah.
And that got to be a kind of an ongoing joke.
Yeah. For the viewers just tuning in to this show and may have missed the first part of this conversation we're having, your nickname was Fatter.
Fodder, yeah.
And
well, they would say.
See, we should explain that part now, because
Yeah.
people haven't seen the first part.
Well, what I did, I had to do a role down there. Initially, I was down as a Red Cross government liaison, so I had my Red Cross gear on. Once I found out there was a need for a chaplain down there and that they needed some effort in that area, I also had my clerical garb with me too, and my collar and so forth. So when they see a collar, they immediately assume you're a Catholic priest, and they call you Father. Well, in Jersey, in that area, in Brooklyn, it wasn't Father, it was Fodder. So I picked up the nickname Fodder Gary, and they actually made a tag, which was F-A-D-D-E-R, for Fodder Gary. Okay, now and, that was the standard joke. So
now we clarified that for people.
That's who Fodder Gary was. Yeah. Underground, the restaurant, right? We didn't talk about that, did we? Did we talk about the restaurant? No, we didn't. That was pretty unique.
I was blown away when I read that in the book.
Yeah, we had looked. They were down there searching for spots and obviously searching for people constantly that may have survived this. And one of the areas I went into was about 3 levels down. There was actually a promenade area below the towers. There were parking garages down there, shopping areas, restaurant areas, and so forth, in addition to the subway. And going down about 3 levels, they actually found some doors, some glass doors that they had slid open to go in to look. And it was a restaurant. And when they opened it up, it was absolutely pristine. It had been set up for breakfast. The pastries were on the table. The orange juice was poured. Everything was set up for a breakfast buffet. And when you walked in there, it was spotless. It was absolutely clean. The glass wasn't broken. Anybody who would have made it in there had it been opened. It had not opened up yet, if I remember right. Anyone who would have been in there certainly would have survived it. But it was just untouched. It was like this little safe zone right in the middle of all this horrendous carnage.
A little oasis.
Yeah, and it was there, and it was intact.
Yeah, that's amazing. It had to be an eerie feeling when,
pretty much,
all this hell you went through, and you go down there, and there it is. I mean,
yeah, there was that one spot, one sanctuary.
Speaking of sanctuaries, I want to tell our viewers about Burger King and the young people there, and that whole story.
Yeah, a lot of the buildings in the immediate area, this was near the South Tower, right on the corner, there was a huge Burger King down there that had opened up, very busy one. And when the towers came down, it literally blew out the inside of the Burger King. It looked like a bomb had gone off. So we kind of used that. I used it as an area to set up a chapel, to counsel and to talk and to pray with the responders that were down there that wanted to get together with me. And at the same time, when I arrived, and this is on September 11th, the afternoon, there were kids in there. And when I say kids, I'm talking kids, 18, 19 years old, which are kids to me at my age, that had gone in there. Were about 4 of them. They were college students, first-year college students, and they responded on their own. They walked in the area. Again, this is before security was set up. And they walked in the area, and they started sweeping it out and cleaning it out and carrying out equipment, setting up tables, washing everything down. And they went out, and they started getting food and bringing food in for the workers that were there. Now, a lot of people thought that when you were right there at ground zero, all kinds of food was being brought in and you were given meals and so forth. And although we'd like to think that when you were there, that really isn't true. We did have the Red Cross there, we had Salvation Army there, we had Second Harvest there, we had a lot of really wonderful groups down there that were helping with food and water and anything we needed. But they couldn't get into that area. They were, in some cases, 13 blocks away on Canal Street because it was too dangerous in that area. So it meant if you wanted to eat and have a cup of coffee, you had to take off 80 pounds of gear and breathing apparatus and go, 10 to 13 blocks to get something to eat.
Take a hike.
Yeah. They didn't want to do that when you're in a rescue effort like that, and you don't leave to go and do that and get your coffee and sandwich. So these kids brought it in, and they set up this Burger King as a feeding station. They bought food. Many of them used their own tuition money. They took their first year tuition money and went and they bought food, and they stocked this Burger King. They brought in water. They got cell phones that they brought in. I don't know where they got them, but they had cell phones if we wanted to call our families and tell them we're okay, and we're all right, not to worry about us, that kind of thing. They had sleeping areas that they set up on the 3rd floor. And these 4 young people went out and they called 2 of their friends. And then those 2 friends would call 2 more. And by the time they were done, they probably had close to 28 young people working there. And again, these are college age, early college age, who were working on 4 shifts around the clock. They never left our side, and they provided every single thing that we needed in order to get through those days and those nights down there while we were working. They were just amazing kids, and I got to meet a lot of them and get to know them. Several of them ended on going into the ministry. And
really?
Yeah, 4 of them that I know went to seminary.
So, that's interesting.
Yeah, it really was wonderful. And I called them my band of angels.
Yeah.
These were my kids, and we got very, very close. I really got to know them well, and they just had such good hearts, and they cared so much, as did so many other people in the neighborhood that lived there that came in to help us and bring sandwiches and bake brownies and cookies and things like that.
Yeah.
It was pretty intense.
At one time, they had asked them to leave, remember?
They did. They had been there. I think this was my 8th day being down there. Finally, the government came in. The federal government came in. We all know what happens when that occurs. So they came in and they saw all these kids in this Burger King right there at the edge of the pit, right in ground zero, where nobody was allowed to come. Even the media didn't get in there. And there they're working. And they've been there helping us for 8 days before these guys
realized
before they ever got there. So FEMA came in and they said, oh, no, they don't have security credentials. They haven't been cleared. They haven't this. And they came back to me and they said, Father, what are we supposed to do? They tell us we have to leave, we have to be credentialed and so forth. And at the time, I had called the Red Cross, and I told them of the situation. And unfortunately, they have their rules too, because they're a nationally recognized organization and sanctioned under Congress and so forth. They have to follow specific rules too. And they told me they can't credential them that fast. It just can't be done. And that they would have to leave. There's nothing they could do about it. As I had this conversation, there was a gentleman there from the Salvation Army. And I love his name, and I'll never forget it. His last name was Miner. I think it was George Miner. And he was a major. So I called him Major Miner.
Yep.
And Major Miner heard the conversation, and he said, you got a problem, pal. He says, let me see what I can do. And he called Salvation Army. And he said, you got a list of the names? I said, you bet. You got addresses? Absolutely. Social Security? Yes, I do. And I gave him everything. And within, it couldn't have been an hour and a half, every single student that was down there was credentialed, approved, and put through FEMA so that they could stay. So on my last day down there when I left, I remember midnight, the 10th day, they were still there. So.
Makes you feel good about the American spirit, Yeah. Through all that, all these young people came out.
I get a little emotional about that because these kids were just such an inspiration.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, you ever go? You went back right after 1 year, but you haven't been back since.
I was asked to come back for the first anniversary, where I did a sunrise service for the people that were there, and that was the first time the families were actually allowed to enter the site and walk down. There was a ramp built, and they went down, and they could stand on the footprints where the building stood, and they brought flowers and they lit candles, and we had prayer down there, and I got to meet a lot of the families of people that were lost there and get to pray with them and talk with them, which was a wonderful, wonderful day. That was the last time that I went back down again. I plan on going down for the 10th anniversary. I've been invited to come back down. But I haven't been back since. What I have been doing is I put together a memorial, a display, if you will, with audio, visual, and pictures that are, one of a kind. They actually toured with the Smithsonian that I took when I was there. And I set that up every year, and I invite people to come and see that, and a lot of family members come and see it. It's been in different cities. It's been down here, and at the same time I talk about what went on and what we did, and have the book available for those that want it. I sign the book and inscribe it, and again, the money all goes to charity. So we do fundraising for the memorial that way, 9/11 Memorial in New York. And I've been doing that every year since.
So if anyone wanted to have you with your display, they call you or send you a letter, or how would you prefer they get a hold of you? Email?
Well, they can call me. As I said, I've set it up every year. Now this year I'm not doing that because no one has said anything about setting it up. And it's a fairly large display, but it's a beautiful display. It's a wonderful tribute, not only to those at the World Trade Center, and I made very sure of that. I mean, there's a lot of great remembrances for the firefighters that died there and so forth, and there's always services there. Again, tied in with the World Trade Center, but this is also a memorial for those who died at the Pentagon, and there were great losses there too, and those that had given their lives to try and prevent further damage and loss of life on Flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville.
Yeah, you have a couple of photos there.
I do, yeah. This is one I got from the Pentagon. This shows the impact where the plane hit, and by the grace of God, my nephew is still with us today, because where it shows the nose of the plane going in was his office. He worked for the Pentagon, and if he would have been in his desk that day, he would have been lost instantly. Fortunately, they were having a new phone system put in their office that day, and they were about a week behind on installing it, so they were still over in temporary quarters on the other side of the Pentagon, and the office area was empty where he was supposed to be, and it's the only reason he's still with us today. And then the other picture I received, a woman had heard about the display that I set up, and she lives right next to the property where the plane came down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and she took this picture from her back porch, and you can still see the smoke plume after it hit the ground.
Yeah, that's a
very rare photo.
That's a very tremendous story in its own. These men that put in their lives in danger and eventually paying the ultimate price, but how many other people they would have saved, by commandeering that plane away from the terrorists.
Well, they had found out afterwards that the intent of those that took that plane, that commandeered that plane, they had two targets in mind, and it was either going to be the White House or it was going to be the Capitol building, whichever one was available to them. So the sacrifice that they made in giving their lives on that day probably saved thousands of lives, let alone these marvelous monuments to our freedom.
This conversation we're having about September 11th, this is not something that has to be said every September 11th. It could be said any day of the year, because it's something we should always remember and honor the men and the women who passed and the heroes that were there that day. You did have a lighter side. I understand you like Mr. Letterman. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, actually I do. I went down, you're talking about when I went down to the theater area to see the show?
Yeah, well, you got a ride. Tell us about the ride, too.
Oh, going down.
How it all came about?
Well, actually it was kind of interesting. It was a pretty busy day. I did have a day where I had a little bit of time to myself, which was very, very rare. And David Letterman was doing a show in New York, and I got a ride down there. I had also been going to memorial service at the same time for those that had died. It was being held at St. Patrick's, and we had just come out of the pit. We had been working down there, and we were pretty dirty and kind of messed up with ashes and everything else, and still had our breathing apparatus on us. And a couple of state troopers were there. And as I said, you're reading this fresh. I haven't read it in a while, so I mean I get it exactly accurate. A couple of state troopers were there, and we figured, well, New York State troopers, they know the area. I didn't know how to get there from ground zero because it was new to me. So we asked him, can you give us a ride? I was with one of the fire captains going down there, and this guy knew everybody. So we got a ride with the two troopers, and we're driving, and we keep going around. And I knew New York enough to know when I'm going in circles, and we were. And finally we asked the troopers, we said, do you have any idea how to get to St. Patrick's? And he goes, no. He says, we're from, I
think it was Buffalo.
I think it was the Buffalo area or Watkins Glen. He says, we haven't got a clue, but we think it's around here somewhere. Well, finally, they don't ask directions, not a trooper, and we found it, and we got there. And the interesting thing was, I walked in the side door, and the service had already begun, and the cardinal was up there, and all the dignitaries were in the front row. And at the time, I walked in.
You had gotten, excuse me, but you'd gotten down there earlier to get your name on the list, correct? Or something, was there something about getting your name on the list so you could go to the show, get tickets?
Oh, on the Letterman show, it's hard to get in. It's very difficult. I did go down there, and you sign a list, and if you're lucky, you'll make it in the line and you'll get in there. Well, I had signed the list, and you have to show up at a certain time. And I did. And I was way, way in the back, and one of the people had walked by with the show and saw what I had looked like at the time. I was a mess. As I said, I had ashes all over me and everything else. And they had approached me and they said, you know, you can come over here. Step over here, please. And I did. And when they opened up for the show, we were the first ones to go in, and I ended up with a seat right in the front, right there, which was terrific. And I think if I remember right, that day they had Matthew Broderick on as one of their guests, and Matthew actually came down to the site. He and his wife came down with sandwiches that they had made. Now, this is a great movie star, and he was down there with sandwiches, passing them out to us as we were working and helping us out in jeans and a whole shirt. But it was just a great experience. It was a wonderful experience.
Still got the guitar pick?
I do. Paul Schaefer was there, and he saw me sitting there, and as he was playing, he took his guitar pick and he shot it right at me, and I caught it, and I still have it at home. I have a box at home with all the memorabilia from there, a lot of things that are very special to me, and that's certainly one of them.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But the St. Patrick's thing was interesting too, because initially security was very tight there, very tight. There were people all over. You had the governor there, and Giuliani was there, and so forth. And I kind of stood off to the side by myself, and again, I'm filthy. And I saw Giuliani looking over at the time, Mayor Giuliani, and kept looking and looking, and finally one of his escorts came over, the guards, and before he could say anything, look, I said, I know I shouldn't be here, I said, but I really felt compelled to be here. And he said, oh, no, no, no. He said, he wants you to come over. And I said, really? He says, come with me. So I walked over, and here Mayor Giuliani is sitting there, and all the dignitaries are right there, like in the front row. And he turned around to one of the fellows. He said, slide over and make room for this man. So that was pretty special.
Yeah. Went from the Bob Euchre section to the
absolutely
right up front.
Yeah, front row.
But you didn't get to meet Letterman.
I didn't.
But did you know there was a rumor that when Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien were going at it, that I might walk in to take their place? It's a rumor.
Is that right?
I started it. Nobody believed it.
I think it'd be a wonderful idea.
But at least we got you on our show, so we're happy about that.
And I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
And well, I don't know what else there is to say. Is there anything that you, or anybody in particular that you remember, or I know you went through a tremendous mental after it was over, because
that's not it.
I got to tell you a little. I got to tell you a little story about my experience, because everybody remembers September 11th.
Sure.
You know, that's old enough to remember anything. You know, I was in California. I was in San Francisco, and I was at a convention, and it started. I put my wife on a plane on the 9th, sent her back. The convention started on the 10th, and I woke up on the 11th, and I turned the TV on. And I thought it was like the Chinese, station or something, because the big Oriental part of San Francisco. So I thought this must be like one of those Japanese movies or something, So I turned it on to like channels 2 or 6 for the regular broadcast, and just then I saw the second plane hit, and I was like, my God, this is real, And I didn't know what really to think. I mean, I put my suit on and I went to the convention center, and it was like dead silence. Nobody was really into the mood, And the day before that, Lee Greenwood was there, singing "Proud to Be an American."
Right.
He was there live the day before singing it. So now they show it on the big screen, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place. One of the most emotional moments for me was because New York, there's a lot of I was with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and they had lost some of their members there, Local 1, and we all were just like embracing each other, and out of the back came this one young fellow stood up and said, "We Canadians, because we are International Brotherhood was in the United States and in Canada. He says, we would like to join our brothers in America singing God Bless America."
Wow.
I mean, there was not a dry eye. I even
Very
choke up when I think about it, you know. But it's something I'll always remember, and I'm sure everybody has that moment, you know.
Well, we always remember certain dates. I know I remember where I was when I heard about the Kennedy assassination. I'll certainly never forget about 9/11. In fact, my greatest fear is that others will forget about it, and I see that more and more every year. As I mentioned to you, I bring a memorial display every year, and I've taken it to different cities, and it's very well received, and many of the families come to see that again to remember and to pay tribute. Not to make them sad, but we need to remember. And my fear is we're at the point now where people don't want to hear about it. They don't want to remember it. And if we forget it, we run the risk of reliving it again. And I don't ever want to go through that again or have my country go through it.
You know what? I think you're doing a great job. And I think we all as Americans have to remember that. And I'm sorry, man, but we're out of time.
That's okay. I appreciate it.
I mean, we could chat all day. But once again, the book is 10 Days of Hell and Heroes. You can get it through Gary. You want to mention again your address?
Sure. Anyone who would like a copy of it's not available in bookstores because we don't want to pay a fee to have to do that, and all the money does go to charity. So if you would like a copy of the book, you can just send me a letter. It's Gary Kadow, K-A-D-O-W, at 2412 Due West Drive. It's D-U-E-W-E-S-T Drive in the Villages, and it's 32162. And the cost of the book is $20, including tax. And then if you need it mailed to you, it's $4 shipping. So $24, and the book will be delivered to your door. And I will put an inscription in each book and sign it to the person that writes me.
I thank you for coming, my friend. It's good
Pleasure.
to see you
Thank
again.
you,
I'm glad to see everything's going well with SOS.
Very well.
And we're out of time. So to
Thank you.
all our veterans out there, their families, our active military, their families, and to all the heroes, September 11th, we salute you.
Let us know what you want us to present in our future programs. Please call Lakefront TV at 352-728-9707 with your programming ideas and suggestions.